I'm Erin Lawler-Patterson, the goodness chick. I'm an addictions counselor, motivational speaker, author, and parent coach. Join me on the journey of navigating the joys and pitfalls of life, addressing parenting, giving back, mental health, addiction, and relationships. If it takes a village, then join me as one of those villagers. Villagers wanted. So I realized after taping today's episode, my guest was Gail Smith. We talked about a bunch of different issues, one of which was the creation of a sober living facility that she and her husband started and are running in southern New Jersey. And after taping and sitting and thinking, not everybody knows what a sober living home is. Going to explain that to you. So sober living home can sometimes be called a halfway house, and it's kind of a bridge between inpatient treatment and going back to, I'll say the air quotes, the real world. And for a lot of people, when it comes to maintaining sobriety, decreasing anxiety, being able to have access to and live in a sober living environment is so critical and so important, and I think is such a powerful thing. And it's something that we need more of. And then, as Gail kind of gets into a little bit, not everybody knows or are familiar with what these facilities are. And sometimes there can be a little bit of resistance from people within communities that these homes and these facilities are rooted in. But when we kind of take a step back and are real when it comes to addiction's in every community. It's in every county. It's in every state. It's everywhere. And I think these sober living homes that all require funding are so important for us to kind of be in tune with and be able to support and encourage a program that Gail and Chris are running that is just spectacular, and looking at treating and encouraging and supporting the whole person, which I think is so critical. So that's kind of hopefully answers your, and any uncertainty about what that is. And I do hope from the bottom of my heart you enjoyed today's episode. All right, so we are rocking and rolling today. Crazy to think that it is actually almost November. How quickly time is going. Crazy quick. Excited about today's episode. Just as I'm really excited about the fact of Fire Mountain Residential Treatment Center being a sponsor of Goodness Chick. They're located at the foot of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I don't think you get any more beautiful than that, for teens from 12 to 17 years of age. And for our kids who are hurting, who are battling addiction to mental health, man, this place is dynamic and away from it all on a 40-acre plot of land, focusing on long-term sobriety and wellness. I encourage you to check them out. They are on firemountainprograms.com. And if you scroll down to the notes below, you will find all their information, and I encourage you to do so. And kind of going hand in hand in terms of the topic of mental health, addiction, and I'll say strength. My guest today, Gail Smith, is a rock star. We met Gail 6 months ago at an ASAP meeting. Is that correct?
I think about that. Yeah, about that long ago.
Okay, my memory is a little challenged here. You've been kind of heavy on my heart and in my mind lately, and I feel like kind of God pulls our heartstrings at certain and appropriate times, where I had asked you a few months ago about being on the show, and then time passed and, life gets crazy. And then a few days ago, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, first of all, I miss you. Secondly, I feel like you have so much to contribute to this podcast episode. And so if I were to ask you, kind of going hand in hand, in the recent months, there has been an escalated level, to me, it seems like, of loss in our area in particular, South Jersey. And I feel like we're not doing enough about it. I don't think we're communicating enough about it. And I say we collectively, but I'm going to, put you and your husband, Chris, kind of on the spot here, saying you're doing everything about it on the front lines. But there's still people who believe that addiction isn't an issue, that doesn't apply to me. Can I ask you, what do you say to that person?
Wow. I would say to that person, No, it is heavy, but it's a valid question, because we run into that a lot, in the work we're doing, where people, I think you just said it, like some people still have their head in the sand, and people that say that they haven't been affected by it, I say good for them.
Mm.
But unfortunate that statistics show that they will at some point be affected by it. Statistically speaking, 1 out of 10 people are affected by substance abuse or substance use. So if you love more than 10 people in your life, you will be directly impacted by it.
Right.
You know, I kind of make an analogy to 9/11, in that folks may not have been at the World Trade Center, or they may not have been at ground zero, or they may not have been the first responders, but still they're impacted by it. In a sense, if you just think about the airports, think about the security that's changed in the airports. Now we have extensive screening, a ripple effect that happened from an event back in 2001. So those people that weren't there are indirectly affected by it. And like so, I believe that folks are going to be either directly or indirectly affected by the substance use epidemic. Let's think about how many kids are being raised by their grandparents or by a single parent because they've lost a parent to overdose. Think about how many more car accidents there are, how many more dollars are being spent by the federal, state, and county governments to further services. So whether you've been directly impacted or indirectly impacted, we all are being impacted by this.
And I even would very much say that 1 out of 10 is low, in my opinion, where how many times there's somebody in our own life that we love or we care for, we work with, we're friends with, that we don't even realize until later down the road that they are struggling with an addiction. I mean, most people aren't wearing it on their sleeve.
That's right.
And that they're hurting. And it's been interesting in the past years how many people I've come across to say, wow, I had no idea, that I was married to this person and they were struggling. They were an addict. Or it was, my daughter or my grandchild, and it has a ripple effect where I think the more we dialogue that it's realized, like becoming more comfortable, it's more than 1 in 10, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you're probably right about that. I
was bashing your statistics. Sorry, that's not what
I know. But wow.
Probably
yes.
Conservative, right? I mean, if we're really honest about it, and how many people that you talk with on a daily basis, because you're on the front lines, it's like, I feel like it feels like it's everywhere. And that to me doesn't have to be a bad thing when we become more comfortable with, when we talk about addiction, and that it needs, I don't know, I'm kind of running ahead of myself, not to be a stigma. It's something that somebody who needs help.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm going to kind of roll into this with we're talking about addiction, we're talking about stats and people and families, and you're somebody who is epically passionate about this. You are now kind of, I would say, an ambassador when it comes to sharing and being on the front lines for those who are suffering. Can I ask you where that all kind of stemmed from, if you don't mind me asking that?
Sure. Unfortunately, I was someone that was directly impacted by substance use. I'm a mother of a son that struggled with substance use, and unfortunately, I'm a mother that lost her son to substance use disorder. And so for me, being ambassador means taking my pain, my sorrow, my compassion for others, and the memory of my son, and using that for the betterment of others, specifically for those that are in addiction recovery.
And I say, I am honored to have you on today, and my heart aches for you. I also feel like this, I don't know if the unfortunate is the right word, but those who have the greatest impact in life on hearts have been through heavy stuff, have been subjected to loss, to aching pain, and your ripple effect on people for years to come. Reading about, in memory of your son, the sober living home that you and your husband. When was that opened? If you could give a little bit of background about that.
Sure. The home itself we purchased in January, and we had spent the last, I don't know, 6 months, I guess, refurbishing it, making it really a home. And just recently, probably in September, we started bringing our first residents in. So it's pretty fresh in that regards. About there's four men in the house right now, and we have room for 4 more men.
That's awesome. What is the I guess long-term vision with your organization?
Our long-term vision is, I have to say, God dependent first.
Okay.
With our God dependence, our hope, our passion is to open other houses to the degree that this epidemic warrants it. We hope that we eventually work ourselves out of a job because the epidemic will be no more. But until then, we want to keep going and help as many folks as we can, as much as our finances and our God-given abilities allow. And
I say God bless you guys for what you're doing, because it's not an easy task. I do still think it's, as you said, like the epidemic, it's rampant, and it's tiring. And what do you say when it comes to kind of where so much of this stemmed from, in my opinion, when it comes to doctors overprescribing Percocets? When it comes to kind of within our society, I think we are wired to pop pills when we're just achy or uncomfortable. I think this has contributed to a part of where we're at. I mean, what do you think about that? And do you think at any point that do you see things changing in that realm?
Yeah, I've heard that so much from people in recovery and people that are working in the field that they feel like a big catalyst has been the overprescribing of the opiate pain medications. Unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know which way to look at it. I don't have that much contact with doctors per se, or the pharmaceuticals in kind of educating them or helping them see it from a different perspective. But a good percentage of the folks that I've talked to in recovery have said that their substance use started with the overprescribing of pain medicine for surgeries or accidents that have happened either on the job or car accidents, what have you. That's a good portion of where they say it has started.
And I think that's heartbreaking and it's frustrating, because it's so easy just to kind of point fingers. But when you hear so many stories again and again where somebody hurt their shoulder at basketball practice, or somebody was gardening and they hurt their hip, and now you fast forward 6 months later and they go to they're fully dependent on heroin. And to me, right, it's heartbreaking. And I think we've had this stigma or this view of what an addict looks like. And I think many people are off base with that. I think we're becoming more educated, but I believe we're in a war. I believe we're in a battle, and what you're doing, being on the front lines, I think is commendable. I also know that you're involved with Prevention Plus. And if you could kind of give a little bit of a background and information about what that program is to people who are listening, that would be awesome.
Yeah, Prevention Plus is a nonprofit organization. They're in Burlington County, and their main focus is to educate that substance use is a preventable and a treatable disease. And they do that through a variety of programs, educating from children to youth to adults and communities about healthy life choices that may help deter someone from even going down that road.
Okay. And are you working within the school systems?
The position that I have allows me to do some work in the school systems, but that's not my sole focus. I'm out in there in the community throughout the whole county of Burlington, just kind of bringing resources together and doing what we can to fight this fight.
How do you feel like people have received you, in the community when you're out talking, whether it's about, the Kenny Smith Freedom Foundation, or you're talking about, Prevention Plus? Are people pretty accepting, or are they, asking questions, seeking help? Where do you what's your pulse with that?
Yeah, so with my position as a substance use navigator, working with other entities that are involved in the fight, very welcoming. As far as the Kenny Smith Freedom Foundation, we've had, by and large, good feedback from the community, from the neighbors that surround the house. There's been some folks that have been trying to sabotage us, of course, and putting obstacles in our way that we've had to address. And I just believe that the folks that are doing that, it's really out of fear and lack of education.
How have you dealt with that when you've had opposition, when you've had, whether it be something verbal or you said people placing obstacles in your way?
Yeah.
That has to be kind of frustrating.
Well, frustrating, but one of the things that we as the Kenny Smith Freedom Foundation kind of pride ourselves on is that we've done everything right. And I don't mean that we're perfect in what we do, but the way we're doing it, we're making sure that we're doing everything legally, ethically. And so we feel like we can hold our heads up high at the end of the day and say to those neighbors that are trying to shut us down, you really can't, because we've done everything right. And maybe, we didn't say this, but the message is that maybe you have to look at educating yourselves a little bit more about what this really is about.
Yeah, I think that's actually the main point. Absolutely, educating, because with that aspect, it's using the word ignorance and not being aware of what your program is really about and what it's about, reintegrating people back into the community, being healthy.
That's right.
Long term. I think sometimes that's something that's kind of kept out, and to have, every town could benefit from, what you guys are doing big time. If I were to ask you, this was not on your list of questions, I'm going off.
Okay.
What do you, what is it that when it comes to dealing with people's hearts and being on the front lines when it comes to addiction and hearing stories, what frustrates you the most? And it just kind of maybe sometimes takes the wind out of your sails.
I think that one of the things that frustrates me the most is the idea or the attitude that some folks have that they could just stop. If they chose this for themselves, just the stigma that I hear being put on the person that's suffering. My son wanted nothing more than to be free of his addiction. I mean, he told us that so many times. And as I think about his tender heart, back when he was still alive, and if he were to hear folks say, why doesn't he just stop? Or what's wrong with him that he just keeps doing this? And to think of him as less of a person, or I think they forget that inside that person that's struggling is this tender heart person that just really wants to love and be loved as well.
But I always equate it to like having a demon on your back, where it just sucks the life out of you, and all the, the joy, and where it's like, and I've heard it just like you have, just stop. And to me, it just seems kind of ludicrous to even let that come out of your mouth, but this is where educating people, I think, is important. Can I ask you, when did you find out that Kenny was struggling with substances?
Yeah, it was as young as 16. He started with experimenting with marijuana and alcohol, and shortly after that started, we became aware that it was becoming an issue, because it wasn't just an occasional party or smoking an occasional joint. Not that I condone even that. That's not my point. But my point being is that it started to be obsessive and compulsive, and as that grew, it wasn't long before we realized that he was on a bad path.
Okay. And then what eventually became, I'll say, like his drug of choice?
Yeah, over the course of from 16 to age 20, I think it was a plethora of substances that he experimented with, abused, but then eventually it did lead to heroin.
Okay. I am sorry for your loss. I hate kind of throwing out questions that are so personal. But part of the reason of having you on the show today is I think about the thousands and thousands of moms and dads and brothers and sisters and best friends that don't have that person with them. And I think the only word that can kind of put that together is it sucks. And nobody rolls out of bed in the morning and says, you know, on my to-do list is I want to become an addict. That's insane. That's not how it happens. And so like you had said, you know, with Kenny, it was gradual and then kind of picked up speed and there were red flags. And I say, you know, I don't know. I wish there was an answer. I do think what you're doing in terms of providing a sober living is just beautiful. And I do believe that you and your husband, not only making Kenny proud, but you're saving lives. And to me, dude, that's so powerful. And I believe that there's somebody that's listening today that maybe doesn't want to admit that that person they love is struggling, or that it's that bad. I'll kind of use air quotes. And to me, what is there to lose in addressing something that could keep them here, if that makes sense? Or does that make sense? You know, where I think we can get really uncomfortable sometimes, and or it's, you know, I don't know if that may even make sense with where I'm going with this, but I think
I think so. I think I hear you saying that ignoring it is not going to make anything better, but acknowledging it at least has the potential to make things better.
Right. Doesn't make it, it's nothing's 100%, but I think, you know, I mean, you know, you and Chris were, hey, we saw these red flags, you were on it. And you know, the outcome was still heartbreaking, but I think there's a lot of people out there that do keep their eyes closed and say, you know, it's really not that bad. And just like you had said, like, hey, the occasional joint, you know, drinking, whatever, I do feel like we're in a different world than we were 10 years ago, you know, and you can call me out if you think I'm wrong, between the potency of marijuana to, you know, now you throw in pills. It just changes the whole dynamics of everything. And so, you know, I had a friend reach out to me from California and she's like, hey, Erin, you know, their kids range from elementary school to high school. And she's, you know, seeing what I'm doing a goodness chick and being in different high schools and talking and, you know, with different programs. And she's like, this schools that my kids are in, they're not doing anything. Like, we're not talking about it. And she's like gutted about it. And my thing is, we need to be talking about this more. We need to be making it comfortable from elementary school and up. You think about that kid, you know, that third grader who, you know, I found a box of needles that were mommy's, you know, in the back room, to, you know, my sister or what, like, it's every age group. And we need to stop. I use the term butthead, stop being buttheads about a topic that, like, we just need to be more comfortable about, you know? Right. I mean, like, do you have anything to add with that? I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but it's like, I just feel like we're making such a stigma that just is holding people back and making people feel almost dirty. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think about that. And I think a lot of it's, I think, fear sometimes, fear of, you know, if I acknowledge it, then I have to do something about it. Or sometimes I think there's some magical thinking in there. And what I mean by that is, if I pretend it's not there, I have this illusion that I can keep myself safe, my kids safe, my family safe. And that becomes that's them and not us kind of mentality. And I think a lot of times it's fear. And I think schools, I think it's fear there too, where a lot of schools are not really acknowledging the depth of what has to happen. And they need to really get their head, and I hate to say this, get their head out of the sand and say, yes, it is in our schools. And what I think happens is the schools are so afraid of being seen that they've done something wrong or they've failed as an educational system. But as schools and communities and churches across the board start to understand that addiction is not a moral failure or a character flaw, and so that they as an entity are not to blame either, and it's no one's fault. It is what it is. And so all of these people, and I say that kind of a universal thing, all of these people, all these communities, all these individuals need to come together and be part of the solution and make a difference. We need to start being proactive, and put the fear aside, because it's not a family's fault that it happened. It's not the school's fault that it happened. It's not the church or the synagogue. It is what it is, and fear needs to get put aside.
And I think that was beautifully said. Fear needs to be put aside. I also think pointing fingers is expending so much energy.
Yes.
We need to go into this together. As somebody who's I worked in the school district for 14 years, I do believe the district I work in was pretty progressive. I also do think that with all of us, we always can learn and always can grow. I do believe there needs to be more support systems. I do believe we need to kind of keep our eyes open more, where it's not, I think it's all how we look at it. That if you have, to me, holy cow, my kid's high school or my kid's middle school has the appropriate services, that if, stuff hits the fan, and it's going to hit the fan, there's somebody there for my kid or my kid's friend. And I know, like we were talking about, I was a student assistance coordinator. In my heart of hearts, every single elementary, middle, and high school needs at least one student assistance coordinator, substance awareness coordinator, whatever you want to call it, a SAC. And it's not, God, how many times people would say, well, you're a drug and alcohol counselor and you're in a high school. Yeah. And everybody should have one there because it's part of life. And when it's like, we're not going to, we've engaged in conversation with this. I believe at least for every 1,000 students, at least, if not 500, there should be one SAC. And it's not about solving any problems. That's not what they're doing, but they're putting out fires just like you guys are. And it's like you give someone a bucket with a bunch of holes in it, go run around and that's ridiculous. But that's what you're doing when you have, say, one SAC to 2,000 students or 1,500 kids. That's crazy. And it's unfair. It's injustice to the kids. And so I say state by state, county by county, this is something that needs to be looked at, just like within the churches and the synagogues. Instead of pointing fingers, let's come together. It's providing support groups. One of the things I super love, dude, I love them. Heroin Kills in Medford, New Jersey, doing great things. Great things. I was like, Red Man, I had him on speed dial. Just you guys wear your heart on your sleeve and providing, at night support groups that people can just be heard and feel loved and just take that heavy backpack that they're walking around with of all these emotions and just kind of put it to the side for a few hours. And we need more of that in churches and synagogues instead of, we're worried about what if this says AA or what if this says, like, what? If we turn that thinking, I think things would change drastically. And yeah, man, we got 2 SACs in our school. Rock on.
Yeah.
And, right? It's all how you articulate and look at things.
Right. Having 2 SACs, wow, let's applaud that. It's not a negative, it's a positive. When I think about the number of overdose deaths that we've had in just our community, our county, in the last 2 years, and think about how many of those were over the age of 20, probably the majority of them, I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm going to make a raw estimate and say they probably were all over the age of 20. But let's think about this. When did they start using?
Yeah.
In high school, probably.
If not middle school.
Mm-hmm. So we need to be in the schools and being more proactive and being more hands-on and more preventive programs. and be talking about it rather than not talking about it. It's a shame. It breaks my heart, but hopefully the wave is coming, and hopefully we're going to be moving in that direction.
And you guys are part of that wave, man.
Thank you.
You know, I mean, a sweet little swell coming out. I mean, that's what you guys are, and we need more of you know, like, man, more of you guys with passion, and who are making a difference. And I say keep getting your voice out there. And I do want to really just super duper plug, because actually I want to ask you this: what kind of needs do you folks have right now when it comes to with your son's the foundation, Kenny Smith Freedom Foundation? What kind of things do you accept donations? Do you can they hop on the website and, you know, or drop something off if things are needed? I mean, I'll let you fill in the blank with that.
Yeah, you know what, God, I have to say, God has been good. Right now, I would say our needs aren't great, but as we move forward and we want to expand the Kenny Smith Freedom Foundation, like I said earlier, to more houses and to serve more people, donation funds are always welcome. I'm not the kind of person that likes to ask, but if there's people that want to give, that would certainly be a blessing for finances and help us move forward to maybe purchase another house and try to help, like I said, as many people as we can until this epidemic's over.
So you can absolutely benefit from some financial donations, because this is a long-term focus right now. So I'm going to encourage you, if you get a chance to, I know you have a Facebook page. Is that where we could say you want them to go, or to like the .org site?
Either one.
Okay.
I'm Standing Up for Kenny on Facebook.
Okay.
It's called I'm Standing Up for Kenny, or to the Kenny Smith Freedom Foundation.org website.
So check either of those out, and also following you on Facebook with what you guys, you know, you and Chris are doing is dynamic. If you have the opportunity to hop on and just to read about your mission, your focus, and follow you as time goes on. And I know, you know, it's uncomfortable to ask, you know, but you know what, there's people with willing hearts who feel the tug and never say no with that. So
I would never turn a donation down, but I have a hard time asking.
So I'm asking through this podcast.
You could ask for me. You asked for me, Aaron.
In 4 languages. Actually, I only speak English, and I'm challenged with that, but I will try in the future. But Gail, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here today. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your passion and the ripple effect that you're having on so many lives. And I want to just wish you, my listeners, a heap of peace, love, and goodness. And when time permits, please hop on those sites. And also take time to hop on goodnesschick.com. And remember, we're fighting this fight together, my friends. And it's all about living life to the fullest and going in it together and not pointing fingers. Peace, love, and goodness.